All I want to get is $1 million in assets. And then I got to $1 million and I'm like, oh, I want 5 million. And then I got to 5 million, I want 10 million. And now I got to that point and the goalpost just keeps on moving.
How do you become a millionaire? Ryan takes us to how he got first deal done, second deal done, how he did house hacking.
The common denominator that I've found with a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed is that the money will come, but it's the grind, it's the game, it's whatever you want to call it. That's the addicting part.
Ryan's going to share with you how he just wanted to retire easy. Now he's running multi-million-dollar companies. How did he do it? Let's join Ryan Greenberg. So, Ryan, how do you define success? What do you see it as?
I would say that answer, if you'd asked me 5 to 10 years ago, might have been different. But now I find it something where in the beginning, I guess it was always about the money. And then when you get the money, it's about your time. And right now I'm more in the camp of when you can do what you want with your time and your life is financially okay with you doing what you want to do, whether that's working, building businesses, going fishing, or going to the movie theater, whatever it is. If you could pick what to do and financially you are stable, I think that defines success for me. That's a huge thing, you know.
Yeah, it's amazing how our definition of success grows and changes over time. The old learn, earn, return strategy of, first you got to learn money, then you got to earn the money, and then you work out ways to give back sort of thing. Whether it's giving back time or money is a big part of it. Do you think that you chose success at some point, or do you think it was a natural thing with your family, or how was that?
So my family they always wanted success, but they were very conservative. So I started my career as a public school teacher. My parents were very adamant on me going to college, getting a regular job, getting a pension, that whole thing. That was success for them. I started working a regular job and I was not happy. I felt like I had there was a ceiling that I wasn't happy hitting. And that life to me was kind of just a little boring. So
Can we just touch on that a little more? Because most people in that scenario will never make the leap. How? What? Where did you jump out or leap out, or what happened?
I started my venture in buying real estate while I was working as a teacher. And there got to a point where the one job was making more in 1 month than the whole other job was making in the entire year. So at that time, I did a simple numbers game, and I was like, I could go get another job and replace this other income if all things go to hell in the real estate market. But if I take the time that I'm taking over here at this regular job and push it into this other venture, that could 10x where my teaching career could never 10x. That was never an option. It never was going to be scalable because you have a set salary and it goes up 1 to 2% a year, whatever it is. When I was seeing the real estate stuff, the money just made more sense. It just was like, okay, the more I work, the more I put into this, the more I understand, the more I earn. And that to me made it very easy. I called my mom 1 month and I said, I'm not going back to work. I'm done. And she was very upset.
I remember doing that too. My mom looked at me and went, "You can't. What a huh, huh." And I used words back to my mom, Ryan. I said, Mom, you always said if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Please don't. And she didn't talk to me for 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, my mom was convinced that I was going to ruin my life, that I was taking on debt that I would never be able to pay back, so on and so forth. You name it. She named it. And the month that I quit, I'll never forget it. It was the month before, it was June. And then I had to tell the school that I wasn't coming back in July because they were expecting me basically second week in August to start. And I looked at our June numbers, and I think we made something like $168,000 in profit that month. And I looked at my salary as a teacher at that time. I was like $48,000 a year. So I was like, if I could do this in 1 month now, even if this was an exceptional month versus the other ones, I don't need to go back to this job. That was like, if I take the time that I'm spending at this job and just put even half of it back into the business, I'm going to get a way better return. If I had a job making $250,000 a year as a scientist or something, a doctor, maybe I would look at it differently. But all I had to do was replace $48,000 a year in salary. I could do that working at Starbucks almost.
You could do that in one real estate deal. You could also do that just driving Uber, for goodness sake, these days. I mean, it's a totally different thing. So I want to go back though, Ryan. The idea of becoming a millionaire, becoming wealthy to most people, it seems foreign to them. Yet when you like your podcast, you look at everyday millionaires, right? There's a lot of fallacies in my mind about becoming a millionaire is just so different, so far off, so far away. Today, it's almost own your own home, you're a millionaire type thing. I mean, it's crazy where we're going to. But what did you learn in all that time interviewing all those millionaires around what is the traditional, what's the typical millionaire look like today?
Yeah. So, like you said, I mean, it doesn't take all that much to become a on paper millionaire, whatever you want to, however you want to define that, $1 million in assets minus, liabilities. If if you have a home in like the mid range of, let's just say, 500,000 to 800,000, which is kind of like not that crazy anymore. And you have a regular job, even if you don't own a company, you don't make that much money, you make low six figures, which is most jobs now. You could become a millionaire in 15 years without doing anything exceptional. You just pay down your mortgage, right? Just pay off your mortgage and put some of it into the S&P 500, and then boom, you're a millionaire, by 35, 40 years old, whatever it is. Um, the the one thing that I look at when I'm interviewing people on my podcast is what drove them to get where they are. Most of the people are entrepreneurial, and it's not at that point for the most of them, the common denominator, it's not about the money. It's a game that we're trying to play and level up. And when you think that, when I think back to when I started, and I was like, all I want to get is $1 million in assets. I didn't even care about the millionaire status. I just wanted to collect $1 million in rental properties. That was my goal. And then I got to a million, and I'm like, oh, I want 5 million. And then I got to 5 million, I want 10 million. And now I got to that point, and the goalpost just keeps on moving. And it's not even about the number. It's not about the money. It's like I look at it almost as like points in a game, in a video game. And that's the common denominator that I've found with a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed, is that the money will come, but it's it's the grind, it's the game, it's whatever you want to call it. That's the addicting part. That's what I feel like most of the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed all have in common.
I think that you're right. It's that attitude, that desire to level up. You said something in your story, which I find very regular in millionaires. I realized that I could never multiply my income over here. The only way I could is to go and do something different. And that's where, if you look at it, there's one similarity in the vast majority of millionaires. They own their own business and they pay off their own home. I mean, two similarities. I mean, when I read The Millionaire Next Door, Stanley and Danko's research, 4,000 millionaires they interviewed, there was nothing special about any of them. They were just tenacious. They built their own business. They paid off their own home. In fact, interestingly enough, Ryan, the number one profession of the spouse of the business owner millionaire was school teacher. Funny that. Then it was nurse. Then it was nurse second. School teacher first, nurse second. It was the two things. So let's look at real estate then. And what made you decide real estate was your game or your investment strategy? Because the old axiom of you don't have to be rich to invest, but you have to invest to be rich is true. You started small, worked your way up, but why real estate? What were the things that said, I've got to be in this game?
So when I started investing back around 2015, 2016, real estate, like podcasts, Bigger Pockets, a couple of like books that I've read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, just all pointed to real estate as being a passive investment, where I thought when I first started that I would be teaching for 30 years and retire and have 5 to 10 houses that would be part of my retirement plan. That was the goal. There was no, running $10 million construction companies and property management companies and all the other stuff that I'm doing now. None of that was even in my foresight at all. This was just buy the house. I had an opportunity with a private lender at that time. Buy the house, you rent it out, you collect money over the 30 years that I'm going to be sitting in the school teaching. The mortgage will get paid off, and at the end of 30 years of my career, I'll have this many houses that are paid off, and I'll be good. I'll be set. Um, and then the goalposts kept on moving, like I said, and you do a flip and you realize, oh, there's some money in the construction piece of it. You start a construction company. You have to manage the properties. You start a property management company. All those things came later on, but the first thing was passive investment, something that most people know is a tried and true game to be in. That's it. It wasn't anything special. Like I heard a couple podcasts, man, and I was hooked. That was it.
Yeah. I think, and I've said this to people all the time, and one of my team members the other day said to me she's making her offer on her first real estate investment, but she said, I just did what you told me. I went and looked at 50 homes. And by the time I'd looked at 50 homes, I knew what to ask, what not to ask, what to look for, what prices, what rental incomes. I knew all of the things. And it's like, yeah, read the books, do the podcasts, but just go look at homes. Now, you started with a strategy, though, that I love, and I just think it's one of the most brilliant strategies for a young person. You rented out rooms in your own place to offset your costs. How did you stumble into that, or did you learn it and then do it, or what got your brain thinking buy a big house and rent out the rooms sort of thing?
So when after I got my first job as a teacher, this was back in like 2013, I lived with somebody else that was doing that. So I rented out the basement suite of his house.
Sweet. I love it's the basement suite, dude.
It's yeah, it's got a little bathroom, a little thing, it's just the basement. I'm the guy in the basement. But um that's what got me thinking, like, oh, this guy's collecting, $850, whatever it was I was spending a month on me, and his mortgage is only 1,600, and he's got another person renting another room upstairs. So there's three people. If he rents it to him at 850, he's not paying anything to live. That to me was simple math. So my first piece of real estate that I bought, that's what we call it house hacking now. It's like I was going to buy the house. I rented out two of the bedrooms and I wasn't paying anything to live. So typically your rent, your mortgage for somebody in this country is their biggest expense every month. If you get rid of that and just invest it into anything, S&P 500 or treasury bills, for God's sakes, over the 30 years, it's going to be worth a lot more than you think. Uh, that that was it. That was it. There was no other brain power besides me seeing somebody else do it that I was a part of on the other side of the coin, and said, "This is a no brainer. I'll go buy my house." I think my first mortgage, I still have that house. I believe the mortgage is like $1,100, and my mortgage interest is like 275 or something crazy low. And it's right now it's currently rented at like $1,800. But when I was living in it, I lived in one room and rented out to two other people, and I was basically net positive like $150 a month.
I think it's interesting. I don't think the average person realizes that about a third of Americans rent, about a third own with a mortgage, and about a third own their own home outright. They don't have a mortgage. They've paid it off and they have no expense on that side of it. I think that it's good for people to realize there are that many people that have paid off homes and that sort of thing. So when you start thinking about, and you've said it several times, the goalposts kept moving. How was it that, you learned something? I always say when you hit one street corner, only then can you see what the next potential is. What was some of those sort of like goalpost moving events? Like I did this and then I went, holy heck, I've got to do that. And then I did this. That. Give us some of those stories because I think that stuff's valuable for people to understand that you can not just get into real estate, but you can level up yourself in real estate.
Yeah, so the beautiful part about real estate, it has so many different facets to it, right? When you're doing what I'm doing, you have to acquire the property, you have to renovate the property, you have to manage the property. So I had a couple of people where I'm from in New York saw me doing what I was doing just on social media, and all I was doing was posting happy I just got to buy my first rental property, and then pictures of me renovating my first rental property. And people were like, how are you doing this? Especially the people in New York. And I'm like, oh, well, down here in Maryland, where I live now, the numbers are a lot cheaper than what you're used to. Like we're buying houses in the 150 to $250,000 range, and we're renting them out for $1,500 to $2,000 a month. Where in other places in the country, that's not a possibility. You know, you're half million for a little shanty shack in New York. Um, so that's kind of when people started contacting me and realizing, hey, maybe I should get involved in what he's doing out of state. I had the first aha moment was when somebody said, hey, I've been trying to invest. I'm in New York. I have this much money. I couldn't find any deals in New York. Can you help me find deals in Maryland? She came down that first weekend. She bought 3 houses with me. At the time, I was not a real estate agent. I was not a construction guy, and I was not a property management company. But I was managing my own properties, and I was managing my own construction on my properties. So she said, hey, do you know any contractors? Because I don't have anybody down there to help fix these places. And I was like, huh, well, I just used this guy, this other guy for my house. And I could just probably manage him to do your house. And she's like, okay, and then for property management, like, how are you managing your own properties? And I was like, oh, well, I'm using this software called Buildium. I have an assistant now that's, the lady in the office kind of thing doing the admin work. And I was like, yeah, I could do that for you too. And I'll just collect a fee on it. So that couple first transactions, I was like, huh. And then I was renovating another property of my own, and somebody came up to me and was like, hey, I see you just did the roof on your house. My roof's leaking. Can you help me fix it? So I just contacted my roofer and I said, hey, can you go over there and fix this person's roof? He said, sure. He charged me 1,200. I charged them 1,800. They were happy. He was happy. And I made some arbitrage on it. And I was like, okay, this is the next step now. Now I could do this for other people. And now I would say my biggest profits come from the construction company, from building. We're building custom homes. We're building apartment buildings. Those those profits are really, really good. So I stumbled into that. That was not something that I had planned. I had never swung a hammer in my life. That was just something that came about, and that's when the goalpost moved, because I was like, hey, I just made $800 or whatever it was, $600 doing nothing. I just made a phone call. I just collected $600, and I've been getting yelled at by kids all week in the school.
Hey, I want to go back to something because I think this is an important lesson for people. New York, it's got high capital appreciation. Like the value of the property goes up a lot faster because it's that central city whole thing. Maryland, value doesn't go up anywhere near as fast as it does in New York. New York's rent to value is lower because high capital appreciation will have lower rental income. It balances out. Maryland, lower capital appreciation, higher rental income, it balances out. I think it's really important, and obviously you saw this pretty quick as being invested in Maryland rather than in New York, that there is a balancing factor of you will get more rent, but you won't get as high a capital appreciation. But in the beginning, more rent is most important.
You need cash flow. Unless you have, like, you go into New York, some of these other markets, New York, California, whatever, and you buy a property and you have $1 million to put into it. then you might be playing an appreciation game. You have $1 million already. I was a school teacher making barely any money. So that $500 of arbitrage every month that I was making on the rent, times it by 5 properties, I just doubled my salary. That's a big deal, right? So I couldn't care less about appreciation at that point because appreciation didn't pay my bills. If I had something go wrong, the appreciation couldn't bail me out unless I sold the property. And we've all played Monopoly, right? You don't want to have to sell the property. You want to keep it. So
You've thrown out the word arbitrage a few times. Explain that to people, because I think there'll be some people that don't understand what you mean.
So arbitrage, I look at as just like the delta on what you've spent and what you made. So being a middleman of sorts, right? If I had a roofer go out and he charged me $1,000, and I said to you to fix your roof, it would be 1,500. That $500 delta there is your arbitrage, right? That's what I look at.
Yeah, and it's pretty simple, but I think that until you get into the game, you don't realize just how much. Now, you've talked about the construction business right now, and that's obviously a whole other level. I look at level one of real estate investing as just buy and hold. Okay, you just buying and holding, and your first buy and hold should be your own house. And as you've said, you can turn that profitable, especially if you're young. I think that even couples should try and buy a duplex or something so that they've got one for them, one they can rent out, or something like that. Second level, where you got into really early, was the buy and renovate that property sort of thing. When you renovate today, do you have any like financial rules, like I should be only investing 10% of the value of the property, I want to be increasing the value by 30%, or anything like that that can give people a little bit of guidance based on your experience?
Yeah, so right now with the rates being so high, we've had to shift our goals a little bit. But if you'd asked me the same question in 2018, I was like, I want to get a big fat check at the refi table, tax free, because it comes in the refi. And I want to make sure that I'm making $500 a month on that asset. And I was pretty much buying in the same asset class, ARVs, after renovation value, for the listeners that don't know what that stands for. I was looking in the 2 to 350,000 range. So my thing was, at the end of the day, I wanted none of my own capital to be tied up in the house because I didn't have any capital at that time to get
We've got
tied
to
up.
get into that in a little detail too. If you can just go into some detail as to how you would not have your capital tied up after renovation.
Sure. So the banks back then would lend you 80% of your loan to value, like your loan to value would be 80% of the total value, right? So if you appraised a house at $100,000, just make the math easy. If the house appraised at 100,000 and you were going to get a loan from them, the bank would give you $80,000 in a loan, right? Now, the goal back then, and now, like I said, it shifted a little bit now with the rates, was that at the end of the day, I would have that 20% built equity by doing the construction. So if I was all in the property for 80K, meaning I bought it for 60, I renovated it for 20, it was worth 100. And then I refinance it, the bank's giving me my 80 back. That's what I had in it. Now I'm net zero. I got no money in the deal. So any money that I get is just an exponential return because there's none of your own money tied up in that asset. And now I'm more in the camp of like, if I have less than 10% invested of the total value, because as an investor, you're not getting those anymore. Right now, it's like 70%. They want 70% LTVs, 65% in some cases. Um,
Yeah, well, for people like me, if I've got a lot in one area, I'm down at 60% in some markets where they're like, you got too many houses in that market. You're at 60 points. So you have too much risk there. Go buy somewhere else if you want 70 or 80%.
yeah, so that's a game that you kind of have to play with the banks and the brokers and the lenders and stuff. But for me, if I have less than 10% in the deal, and then that 10% is making me a 10% cash on cash return annually, I'm happy because that's a safe place to be. If I'm making a net 10% cash on cash return and the house is appreciating and my debt's getting paid down, you're really looking at a much higher return on investment than 10%.
Well, hey there, and thanks for listening. I've noticed that 78% of you are brand new, which means you haven't hit the subscribe button yet. By subscribing, you help us bring on even better guests, better quality content, and serve you better with even more podcasts. So please hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. It makes a huge difference. If you support us, we're going to support your success and help you achieve big success together.
Yeah, for those that don't understand, cash on cash might be if I'm into the property with 50,000 in cash, and I'm making 30,000 a year, or after rent, after all of those things, if I'm getting 20% a year, I'm getting 10 grand in extra money. It's 10 grand on 50 grand, so it's cash on cash. Sometimes that's referred to as internal rate of return. But that also, then you take into account depreciation, taxes, all of those sorts of things on top of it, plus appreciation. And every state has different software. Every country has different software. You just have to type in. You mentioned one you were using for management, Ryan. Are you using a off-the-shelf version currently for evaluation of cash on cash or internal rate, or are you using something you've developed?
So for analyzing deals now, I've kind of developed my own spreadsheets of ways that I like to look at deals. But there's all these different things to look at, right? Like this past year, I bought a duplex that I bought for 550,000. It's in a very high end A+ community right outside of DC. Typically, you're getting high end government employees living there, and I bought it for 550. I put 75 into it and renovated both sides, and it reappraised at 1.15 million. When I did, so yeah, so I ended up pulling out a 700, I think it was like $720,000 refinance. So I got back a big fat check, $100,000+ check at the refi table, and then I had a big tax, not, I don't want to say issue, but I had to find some ways to get rid of some income of last year. So we did what's called a cost segregation study on that property. And what that does is takes future depreciation. So you're allowed to depreciate rental properties for 27 and a half years. But if you do what's called a cost segregation, you can actually fast forward that, right? And say, I'm going to take my depreciation this year. And that comes off of your taxable income. Now, if you were to say the government, Uncle Sam was coming after you for, 250,000, but you just depreciated that asset and you plan on keeping it, right? You plan on keeping it.
Well, you have to if you do that one, yeah.
Right. So you can't do it if you're going to flip it. But if you plan on keeping it, then you take all that. And now next year, when you have the same tax problem, hopefully, you can find another property and do the same thing. So that property I looked at in a different way. It doesn't really cash flow. Like I maybe make $100 to $200 on each unit per month, and if you take into consider vacancy and capital expenditures and all that stuff. But I got 150,000 in my pocket as profit that's non-taxable. It's a non-taxable event because it's in the form of a loan. And then I took a $250,000 paper loss on taxes. That deal makes a lot of sense for me. But for some other people that in the beginning of my career, I couldn't afford to do that because the cash flow, you need the cash flow. So the deals all get analyzed in different ways depending on your needs. If you're somebody that has $2 million in your bank account, well, your goals and your things that you can look at, and you make a high W-2 job, let's just say. I know a guy locally that's a defense contractor that makes like $1.2 million a year at his W-2 job. That's not, he's in a different position. He wants to buy things for tax losses and push the can down the road for Uncle Sam. He's in a much different position than me when I was a third-year teacher trying to buy a couple of rental properties.
Ryan, we could, again, chat on this for hours. I think, though, that the biggest challenge for a lot of people is that they just don't get started. And for me, I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are. For me, getting started meant reading some books. Back when I started, there weren't really podcasts. I read books, listened to tapes. But the biggest thing I did is go find a realtor and ask him to show me around. I literally found a guy. We became friends because I ended up buying a lot from him over the years, but in the beginning, it was just like, I just need someone to show me the market type thing. And as I teach today, go and find 50. How would you suggest to someone to just make the start to the track to get their first deal?
So I have an interesting kind of story to go with that. Some people get stuck in what I call, and not, I didn't make this term, but analysis paralysis, right? They get stuck in this, oh, is this deal a good deal? Is there enough cash flow? Is there enough this? So I have a client right now that I'm doing some coaching for, that for the last 6 years, he's been running a successful company. His NOI is somewhere in the $300,000 to $500,000 range annually. So he's making a net profit of $300,000 to $500,000 a year. And he's been analyzing rental properties for 6 years and not pulling the trigger. And he finally contacted me and asked me to basically coach him on what I was doing. Within 30 days, he closed on his first rental property. I shortened that learning curve. Now, you said find a realtor. Realtors are great as long as they know the investment space. As we know, I'm sure you know a bunch of realtors that don't do anything with they don't make any money. They don't really know about the real estate game. It's a real low barrier to entry to be a realtor. So whether it's finding a coach or finding somebody that's already doing it at a high level and offering to add some sort of value to their life, you can't just go ask them for handouts, right? But if you say, hey, like, I have time, you have this experience, can I help you? Can we JV on a property? I have this time to give, I have this money, I have this network, whatever it is. That is a good place to start. Finding somebody that's in the position you want to be in, and just by law of attraction, just being near them will level you up. And picking the people that you're around is really important. And if I'm sure you've heard and your listeners have heard, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. For me, when I was starting my businesses, I started surrounding myself at these networking events, at on these Facebook groups, as with and communicating with these people that I knew were doing what I wanted to do. And I think that's a huge thing that's overlooked, is like, hey, can I take you out to lunch and just pick your brain? I have this much money, I have this much time. I'd love to partner on something, or I'd love to learn how you've built your portfolio. That is a good starting point. And this guy that I'm coaching now is getting ready to finish his first refinance and get into his second deal. And he's like flabbergasted that he's able to do that. And I'm like, the analyzing deals for 6 years is not necessary. Like, we could shorten that curve by just, let me just show you how I do it.
Yeah, if you're not in your first deal within 6 months of learning, the only reason to not be in your first deal within 6 months of learning is you don't have some capital saved, or you're in a negative, you're in a bad debt position to begin with. But if you're in a fairly much a cash flowed, you got a good job, you should be in a deal in your first 6 months, no matter what, I think is a thing. But you said something there. Networking groups, join real estate investment clubs, join real estate Facebook groups, join the groups, get involved, do that whole thing. Right. I always finish off with one question. That is, what's the best advice you ever got, or the best quote you ever read on the subject of success?
So the one thing that will always stick with me is somebody told me, when you're in your 20s, if you're not sleeping, you should be working on something. And then when you get to your 30s, you could start to focus on your family, but you should still be, at least at that point, making money while you sleep. So if in the beginning, you have to put in the time and the grind. So that's your 20s. That's what he said. And this was when I was in my early 20s. He said, if you're not sleeping, you should be working. And then when you get to your 30s and you get married and you start having kids and this stuff, then you need to be making money while you're sleeping. And if you do those two things, you will be successful financially. Now, happiness and all that stuff is a different story. Some people have all the money in the world, they're still never happy. But for me, I feel location free. I have a house in Florida that I spend a lot of the winters at. I have my boat down there and I go back and forth, and I can still make money while I'm there and come home when it's warm here. That freedom is what I want, right? I don't need a billionaire. I don't need to be a billionaire. I don't need a fleet of private jets or anything. My definition of success is that I'm time free. I can, if something were to happen with my family or something, I could take off and go take care of them and not have to worry about paying my bills. All that stuff, that's what I look at now. So that was the biggest advice that I got was, if you're not sleeping, you're working. And then when you're sleeping, you better be making money, or you got to keep working. So,
Hey, you're on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. Ryan Greenberg, hit the show notes, follow, study, learn, keep doing all those things and keep building your success. And we'll be back next week with more of the Big Success Podcast.
You've been listening to the Big Success Podcast with the #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars. To learn more about how to achieve business and personal success, as well as how to level up or listen to past episodes, visit www.bradsugars.com.